You were never meant to hear this. In fact, every institution that governs your comfort has spent 2 centuries making sure you don't. But something slipped through. A box of papers hidden behind a limestone wall in rural Illinois. Sealed up in 1812 like a wound no one wanted reopened inside. The record of a man, not a criminal, not a cult leader, but a government-appointed guardian of children, and what he did was sanctioned, approved, funded. 45 children entered that summer. Only 12 emerged. The others, their names were erased, their deaths listed under phrases like failure of fortitude or infirmity of will. But this wasn't disease. It wasn't war. This was a systematic unraveling of childhood, an experiment in stripping the soul under the guise of survival training. And it worked, because no one talks about it, not in school books, not in documentaries. You have to ask why. Why a story with this level of psychological horror was buried so deep. It almost vanished entirely, but now it's crawling back up through the dirt, and you're about to know what you were never meant to, not just about Riverside Children's Home, but about what this country quietly allows in its darkest corners. So long as the paperwork looks clean and the building stays quiet. Are you ready to see what lies beneath a nation's praise for resilience? This isn't a story, it's a warning. And once you hear it, you'll never see care, discipline, or education the same way again. This was not one man's madness. It was a reflection, a cracked mirror showing what happens when ideology meets isolation. And no one is left to say stop. You are entering a hidden chamber of American history now, one that still echoes today in the systems that raise your children, train your soldiers, and mold the minds of future citizens. So listen closely, because the same blueprint used in that orphanage may already be running quiet. It began with a winter no one was prepared for, the year without a summer. That's what historians would eventually call it. But in Illinois, in 1812, it was something darker, something elemental. Temperatures dropped and stayed down. Crops failed across the territory. Livestock froze upright in their stalls. Rivers turned to ice and didn't thaw until late May. The land itself seemed to retreat from life, as if warning what was coming next. Riverside Children's Home sat on 43 acres of prairie silence. Bordered by the Sangamon River, its walls were thick. Limestone pulled from nearby quarries, built to endure frontier winters, built to last longer than the people inside. It had once been a refuge, a beacon for the forgotten, orphaned children brought in from disease, violence, or abandonment. Given warmth and structure under Mrs. Elena Hartwell, a widow with no children of her own, she had turned grief into service. Her records were immaculate, her intentions pure. 127 children had passed through Riverside in its first 5 years. 119 placed with families or apprenticed into trade. The rest lost to illness that no one could prevent. It was, by every measure, a success story, until the winter of 1811, until Mrs. Hartwell was found dead in her office. Slumped over her desk in the cold, a heart failure, they said, but the warmth she carried, the protection she enforced, died with her. In that vacuum stepped a man named Josiah Crane. He came with credentials, a war record, a wound-limped walk, and eyes that never seemed to blink. The charitable society, desperate for continuity, gave him full authority. No one questioned why he volunteered so quickly. No one asked why a man with no family, no known attachments, would choose to isolate himself in a building full of orphaned children during the coldest winter on record. But you should ask that quest, now. Because Crane wasn't there to comfort. He wasn't there to educate. He believed something else. That pain reveals truth. That suffering was not a tragedy, but a tool. And the children under his care were about to become test subjects in a philosophy no sane society should have allowed. But they did. Because sometimes the darkest experiments don't happen in secret. They happen in silence, approved, stamped, and forgotten. He arrived on December 15th, and by the end of that day, Riverside no longer resembled the place it had been. The children stood in the main hall, shivering. Still dressed in the clothes Mrs. Hartwell had made sure were warm and thick. They waited, some hopeful, some terrified, all unaware that their childhood had already ended. Josiah Crane entered without a word. He limped slowly across the floor, the echo of his boots filling the room like a clock ticking down. His face was unreadable, his coat still dusted with snow. His left leg dragged behind him, his right arm stiff and crooked from war injuries. But it wasn't the scars that frightened the children. It was his silence, until he spoke, and what he said would never leave their minds. You have been living as weaklings, fed when hungry, warmed when cold, comforted when distressed. This has made you soft, unfit, unprepared for what awaits you beyond these walls. The world will not protect you, and neither will I. He divided them into 3 groups that same night: children under 8, labeled developing strength, ages 8 to 12, building resilience, 13 and older, proving readiness. Each group was given a different version of what Crane called strengthening routines. It began with changes that seemed small. Meals were cut in half. Beds lost their extra blankets. Dormitories were stripped of all but a single fireplace. Crane said comfort was the enemy of courage, and fear was to be burned out, not soothed. Then came the endurance trials. Hours standing barefoot in the snow, holding heavy stones in outstretched arms. Silence drills where no one could speak, no matter what they were feeling. Children who cried were marked as regressors. Those who endured were given cold bread and praised as future leaders. It was no longer an orphanage, it was a forge. Older children began enforcing rules on the younger, not out of cruelty, but survive. Every kindness was punished, every act of softness reported, and still, no one from the outside came, no visitors, no inspections, just the sound of wind howling through limestone walls, and the quiet weeping of those who still remembered warmth. This was not discipline, it was indoctrination, and it had only just begun. The first death was not an accident, it was a message. 6-year-old Thomas Brennan collapsed on January 8th. He had been coughing for days, weak, tired, but still forced to participate in what Crane called cold tolerance training. That day, the children were ordered to stand barefoot in the snow for nearly an hour. Thomas fell first. He cried, then shivered, then went silent, face down in the frost. The others were told to leave him, to step around him, to learn. Only Mary Patterson, a 14-year-old girl with defiant eyes, broke ranks. She ran to him, lifted his body in her arms, screamed for help. Crane walked over slowly, looked down at the boy, and finally allowed him to be taken inside. But it was too late. Thomas died 3 hours later. His skin was gray, his pulse gone, his body too cold for even the crude thermometer Crane used to register. That night, Crane wrote in his log, Subject T. Brennan failed to overcome discomfort. Conclusion: inadequate psychological fortitude. End result: elimination. No funeral, no mourning. Thomas's bed was stripped within the hour, and the next morning, another child was placed in his room. No one spoke his name again. The children began to understand. This wasn't about education. This was about compliance. Survival now meant silence, obedience, and above all, hardness. Crane's rules expanded. No eye contact unless spoken to. No laughter, no consoling those who wept. He introduced what he called will reinforcement sessions. Children were taken one by one into the cellar. They would return pale, sometimes with bruises, other times just quiet, more distant, like something had been taken from them down there. Something they couldn't name. Mary Patterson kept a secret journal, hiding scraps of charcoal and cloth under a floorboard. She wrote, "He wants us empty. He wants to erase what made us human." That winter, it wasn't just a test of physical endurance. It was a tilling of spirit, and Crane believed he was succeeding. The children stopped crying, stopped speaking, stopped dreaming, and no one outside that stone building had any idea what was happening inside, because when the state sent a letter in February asking how Riverside was functioning, Crane replied in perfect penmanship, all progressing as expected. By March, 12 children were dead, and still no one came. No officials, no doctors, no clergy, only Crane and his records. Every child reduced to a subject number. Every death documented, not with grief, but with calculation, as if they were experiments, not human beings. Crane kept meticulous notes. One entry reads, Subject M. Underwood, age 9, demonstrated resistance to correction, required extended reinforcement. Result: compliance achieved following respiratory distress. That was how he saw them, not as children, but as materials. Clay to be molded by pain, shaped by fear. He believed he was doing something noble, that he was creating stronger Americans. Future settlers who would not flinch in the face of death. He thought he was ahead of his time. But the children were breaking, not growing, not becoming resilient, but fragmenting into hollow shells of who they had been. Some began talking to themselves at night. Others refused to eat. One boy, 11 years old, attempted to escape into the woods, wearing nothing but a thin nightshirt. He was found 2 days later, frozen, eyes open, as if still searching for someone to save him. Mary Patterson continued writing in her hidden journal. She wrote, "We dream of fire now. We dream of a warmth that never returns. And when we wake, we forget what our names felt like in our mouths. And yet, still, the silence from outside continued. The snow kept falling. The ground never thawed, and Crane's grip on the children tightened. He introduced new rituals. Children were made to confess perceived weaknesses aloud, to each other every night before bed. Failing to do so meant isolation. No food, no fire, just the stone cellar, and the darkness inside it. One of the younger girls, Beatrice, only 5 years old, was found one morning, kneeling beside her bed, hands clasped, murmuring apologies to a mother she could no longer remember. They were forgetting who Hay had been, forgetting laughter, forgetting gentleness. But Crane, he saw only improvement. He wrote, "The transformation is accelerating. Weakness purged, obedience increasing. They will emerge as something new." And in a way, he was right, because what came out of that home, after the final child died, was no longer innocent. It was something else entirely. April brought no thaw, no hope, only silence, and the sound of shovels carving new graves into frozen soil. The children no longer flinched at death. They simply moved aside, like cattle in a field when one falls, conditioned, numb, and that was exactly how Crane wanted them. He began implementing what he called graduated exposure. Each child was assigned to observe another child's punishment, not to intervene, not to feel, but to witness. Crane believed empathy was a defect, a weakness passed from mother to child. He said the future belonged to those who could endure another's suffering without reaction. Mary Patterson was forced to watch as her friend Ruth was held in the snow for 2 hours. Barefoot, shaking, eyes wide open, she never screamed. She simply stopped moving, Mary wrote afterward. He told me I had to watch until I felt nothing. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I haven't felt anything since. By late spring, only 23 children remained. The others, buried without names. Crane didn't inform the charitable society. He falsified his reports, listing children as transferred to other institutions or sent to distant farms for apprenticeship. All lies. But no one checked, no one visited, no one cared. Crane's philosophy deepened. He created rankings, strength tiers. Children wore colored bands around their wrists. Red for elite potential, gray for neutral, black for correctional focus. It became a game of survival. Children turned on each other, reported each other, all for the chance to move up, to be spared. The bonds that had once existed between them shattered. The idea of friendship erased. What remained was raw instinct, the kind of primal submission Crane had seen in war, the kind that obeys without question, because questioning gets you buried. And still, no one came. The only letters were from bureaucrats, congratulating Crane for managing such a difficult institution during hard times. One wrote, "Your efficiency under hardship is a model of American perseverance." Crane framed that letter, hung it over his desk, above the logbook where he had just written, subject J. Monroe. Expired during hunger reinforcement. Total losses to date, 24. This wasn't failure. This was design. This was a blueprint, and it was working. By May, the children had stopped dreaming. Sleep was no longer rest. It was strategy. A chance to avoid punishment. A chance to avoid notice. They learned to lie still, even when the rats ran across their blankets, even when nightmares made them want to scream, because noise meant attention, and attention meant pain. Crane instituted something new. He called it ritual review. Every Sunday, the children were lined up in the main hall, made to recite phrases he had written himself. Strength is earned through silence. Warmth is weakness. Pain is the path to purity. Some of the younger ones couldn't speak the lines correctly. They were taken to the cellar. Others, like Mary, repeated them perfectly, not because they believed, but because they knew how to survive. Food was down to 2 meals a day, a strip of salted meat, a handful of boiled root, water served cold. Even when children's lips cracked and bled, Crane called it resistance, reinforcement. He said every deprivation was a lesson, that those who suffered without complaint were proving themselves worthy of future purpose. He began selecting pairs. Older children assigned to control the younger. Punishment was delegated. Slaps, isolation, mockery, all done by children, not by him. It created layers of obedience, layers of fear. No one trusted anyone. And Crane, he just watched, writing in his log, measuring compliance, calculating submission. Mary wrote, "We are not children anymore. We are instruments. We are weapons. He is sharpening, and we are turning on ourselves." One child, Peter Pan, age 11, broke. He refused to eat, refused to speak. When asked to recite the ritual, he whispered, "My mother would not want me to be this." Crane dragged him into the cellar. He returned an hour later. Stumbling, eyes unfocused, lips split, Peter never spoke again. And still there were no visitors, no questions from the outside world, only silence. If you're watching this now, feel the weight of what's being said. Type the phrase, "Stone does not feel," in the comments. Type it twice. It marks your awareness. It tells the algorithm that you are not asleep, that your eyes are open, and that what happened here will not be buried again. By early June, the line between child and prisoner was gone. No one laughed. No one smiled. They walked in lines, ate in silence, worked until their hands blistered, spoke only when commanded. Their eyes were dim, unfocused, like the light had been drained from behind them. Crane's experiments reached a new level. He introduced what he called identity stripping. Every child was assigned a new name. Not a name, a number. Mary became Subject 14. Peter was Subject 22. The little ones forgot who they were, and when one girl asked to be called by her real name, Crane struck her across the mouth, then made her repeat the phrase, "I am no one until I am made worthy." The numbers weren't random. They were rankings, grades of obedience, grades of worth. It created competition, hatred, desperation. Children turned against each other, not out of cruelty, but for survival. And in that chaos, Crane thrived. He believed he was building a prototype, a model for future institutions. He called it structured resilience development. He wrote letters to military academies, to religious orders, offering his findings, warning that America's children were too soft, too coddled, and that only through calculated hardship could a strong nation emerge. None of them responded. But that didn't stop him. Mary wrote, "He walks the halls at night, whispering to himself, reciting numbers, smiling, as if he sees something we can't. Or maybe, as if he knows something we've forgotten." The cellar became more than a place of punishment. It became a place of transformation. Children entered, came out changed, empty, Crane wrote. Cellar conditioning results. Optimal. Memory fragmentation noted. Resistance minimal. Breaking point occurring earlier with each session. Outside. Summer arrived, but not inside Riverside. Inside. It was winter forever, and with every new day, another child disappeared. By June 29th, only 17 remained. Crane logged the death of Subject 18, cause, dehydration during endurance protocol. And in the margin, he wrote just one word, promising this was no longer tragedy. It was ritual, and the machine was running perfectly. On July 5th, the girl known as Subject 11 stopped moving. Her real name had been Grace. She was 7, small, quiet. She had survived longer than anyone expected, but that morning, after an overnight silence drill, she simply didn't rise from her straw mat. Crane didn't check her pulse, didn't kneel, didn't speak her name. He turned to the others and said, "Weakness has left the room." 2 boys carried her body out, wrapped in a gray sheet. No grave was marked, no prayer was spoken, just another line in the log. Subject 11, non-compliance due to exhaustion, result, expiration, response. Corrective protocol increased for adjacent subjects. Crane was no longer pretending, no more illusions of education, no more phrases about preparation. He had become what he always was, a commander without a war, using children as soldiers, his doctrine, pain as clarity, his altar, the stone walls of Riverside, and still, no one came, no letters, no visitors, no oversight. Even the local magistrate, who had once promised quarterly inspections, had vanished into silence. Mary, Subject 14, wrote, "I am forgetting the sound of birds, the color of trees. I can't remember my brother's face. Only numbers, only rules, only the cold." The younger children clung to her, not for comfort, but for structure. She became their anchor. But even she, in quiet moments, began to wonder if she still existed. Crane began rehearsing speeches aloud, talking to no one, pacing the corridors, whispering phrases like legacy of strength, foundations of will, purity through endurance. He believed someone would come. Eventually, he was preparing, crafting the narrative, the philosophy, the future. He wrote, "In time, they will see the value. In time, they will thank me." But the walls were closing in, because even in 1812, even in silence, even in darkness, truth leaves fingerprints, and somewhere in those stone corridors, a child was watching, listening. July 15th, the tipping point of the 47 children that began the winter. Only 12 remained, their bodies thinner, faces hollow, minds quiet. Too quiet. They no longer cried, no longer asked why. They simply obeyed. Crane introduced the final cycle. He told them this was the last phase, that those who succeeded would be sent to special families, hand-picked for their strength. He even said, "Some of you will become instructors yourselves. You will spread the doctrine. You will become the fire." But the children, they didn't believe anymore. They nodded, they complied. But inside, something had started to stir. A flicker of memory, a whisper of resistance. Mary began speaking in code, quiet phrases shared at night. "Do you remember the green hills? Do you remember singing? Do you remember who you were before the numbers? Small things, but powerful, like sparks in a forest, dried from suffering." Then came the night of July 22nd. Crane took Subject 9, a boy named Eli, to the cellar. He never came back. The next morning, Mary found blood on the stone steps, and that was it. The children didn't speak, they didn't cry, they acted. They waited until nightfall, and when Crane made his rounds, checking locks, inspecting logs, he was struck from behind by two of the older boys. They used a fire poker, once, twice. Then again, Crane fell, but even bleeding, even dying, he laughed and whispered, "You've proven me right." He died on the stone floor, smiling. The children didn't run, they didn't scream, they simply sat in silence until sunrise, when the magistrate finally arrived days later. After months of silence, he found 12 children in the main hall, their faces blank, their hands folded, and one sentence written on the wall in coal, "We are what you made." And behind that wall, buried in the cellar, they found the journals, the logbooks, the drawings, and the grave markers, some with names, most with a. When Mary was found, she didn't speak at first. Doctors thought she was mute. Psychologists said she was in shock, but they didn't understand. She wasn't broken. She was choosing silence because she had learned, inside those stone walls, that words could be dangerous, that speaking truth meant punishment, that innocence was not protected. It took months, but eventually, she began to write again, not in code, not in fear, but in memory. She filled notebook after notebook with what had happened, the children's real names, the routines, the rituals, everything Crane had tried to erase. She brought back, and then she vanished, not into the woods, not into madness, but into normal life, adopted by a family in St. Louis, given a new name, new papers, a new chance. But she never forgot. At 19, she submitted a sealed package to the Illinois State Records Office. Inside, her journals, Crane's original logbooks, and a letter that began with 7 words. "If you are reading this, it's too late." It sat untouched for over a century, filed away in an archive box, unopened, unquestioned, unseen, until 1987, a construction team, renovating a state building in Springfield, stumbled upon the file. Inside were yellowed pages, pressed flowers from the Sangamon River, and hand-sketched maps of Riverside. The workers turned it over to the Historical Commission, who, unsure of its origin, logged it under local folklore. But one archivist, a woman named Eleanor Keene, read every word. And when she did, she said she couldn't sleep for 6 nights because it wasn't just a story. It was a design, a system, one that echoed through time, echoed in how military schools break recruits, in how cults isolate new members, in how institutions turn people into numbers, and call it structure. Mary's letter ended with a sentence burned into history. This was not madness, this was method. And if no one remembers, it will happen again. And that's why you're here now, because remembering is resistance, and forgetting is surrender. After Eleanor Keene read the file, she didn't go to the newspapers. She didn't write a book. She went quiet, because she understood something that others didn't. This wasn't just about the past. It was about the present, and the systems we still trust with our children, with our obedience, with our identity. She traced the origins of Crane's methods, his terminology, his philosophy, and what she found rattled her to the core. In 1809, Crane had served under a commander named Elijah Wyrick, a man who believed that pain produced purity, that the human spirit had to be bent to find its true form. Wyrick was part of a fringe movement in early American military culture. They called it purification through ordeal. Most of it never made it into official records, but scraps survived: letters, manuscripts, private journals. And those ideas, those dark fragments of doctrine, didn't die with Wyrick or Crane. They simply changed names. You see it now in programs that call themselves character reform, in behavior camps for troubled teens, in black site prisons that don't officially exist, in initiation rituals designed to fracture the self, so it can be rebuilt into something obedient: pain as a teacher, silence as a virtue, dehumanization, masked as development. It was never just one man, never just one building in Illinois. It was an operating system, installed early, refined quietly, protected legally. And here's the part most people miss. It doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks like discipline. Sometimes it looks like motivation. Sometimes it even looks like love. But underneath, it's the same structure. Crush the identity. Replace it with a role. Make them grateful for the process. Crane didn't invent that. He simply applied it without restraint. And Mary, she didn't survive just to tell the truth. She survived to pass on a warning that if we don't recognize these patterns, if we don't name them, by the time the truth about Riverside reached historians, something even more disturbing had come to light. The building was still standing, not in use, not public, but intact, privately owned, registered under a trust with no name, no contact number, no listed board. Locals called it cursed, said they heard voices in the halls, said the walls wept in winter. Teenagers dared each other to spend the night there. Some returned shaken, others refused to speak about what they saw. But the most chilling detail came from Eleanor Keene's final report, filed 3 years before her death. She had returned to Riverside alone. With her own equipment, she recorded nearly 5 hours of footage. Only 2 minutes survived. It shows the main hall, cold, silent. And then, faintly, a child's voice, not screaming, just whispering stone does not feel. The same phrase Mary had written. The same phrase passed among the children like a secret key. Eleanor never released the rest of the footage. She vanished from public life. Her family said she spoke less and less. And when asked why she stopped her research, she answered, "Because some knowledge demands a price. The price is knowing, seeing the machinery behind the curtain, understanding that what we call progress, what we call discipline, can become something else when no one is watching." Riverside was not an isolated nightmare. It was a proof of concept, and the concept worked. Obedience over innocence, discipline over compassion, power over presence. And those blueprints still live in cold boarding schools, in silent detention centers, in the programs that promise to fix your child by breaking them down first. It doesn't start with horror. It starts with rules, with structure, with quiet corrections. Until one day, the child in front of you doesn't look like your child anymore, doesn't speak, doesn't feel, just complies. And if that doesn't terrify you, then maybe you've already forgot. There's one last piece, buried deeper than the rest, found not in a journal, not in a report, but scratched into stone behind a loose panel in the basement of Riverside in 2003 during a brief and quiet inspection by the Illinois Historical Trust. A crew discovered a hidden recess behind the southern wall. No light, just a single brick removed, like someone had pulled it out from the inside. Behind it, etched with what looked like broken iron nail, were 7 words. "We were made to forget our names. It wasn't signed, but they knew who wrote it, Mary." Before she left, Before she sealed the records, before she vanished into a world that would never understand, she left a message not just for investigators, not just for historians, but for you. Because everything we forget returns in new forms, new uniforms, new slogans, but always the same engine beneath. You've seen it in workplaces that reward compliance and punish dissent, in schools that erase creativity in favor of uniformity, in systems that teach children to sit down, shut up, obey, and call that maturity. It starts early. It's embedded in phrases like, "This is for your own good. You'll thank us later." It's just discipline. But Mary's story, Riverside's horror, was never just about children. It was about all of us, about what happens when we let systems replace souls, when we allow pain to be called progress, when we silence those who suffer and praise those who enforce. That etching on the stone, it's not just a confession, it's a prophecy, because once a generation forgets its own name, it forgets how to resist. And that is the goal. Not just obedience, but amnesia, to make you forget who you were, what you loved, what made you human. So if you've made it this far, if your chest feels tight, if your hands are cold, that's not fear, that's memory. That's the part of you that still remembers what they tried to erase. Type the phrase again in the, "This is not just a story, not just a tragedy frozen in time. This is a mirror, and it's staring back at you. Because every generation gets tested, not with guns, not with fire, but with silence, with systems that look safe, sound reasonable, promise protection. But inside, behind closed doors, behind polite language and polished floors, the machine hums. They call it structure, they call it discipline, they call it tradition. But what it really is erosion. The slow wearing down of will, of self, of voice. Riverside was the blueprint. But what's terrifying is how little needed to change for that blueprint to survive. No one asked questions. No one made visits. No one intervened. Because comfort says, it's not my business. It's not my child. It's not happening here. But it is. In programs that still lock children away in the name of help, in systems that punish emotion, reward obedience, erase identity. We call them institutions, but they are rituals. Rituals of forgetting. And Mary, the girl who survived, she didn't just pass along records, she passed along responsibility to remember, to speak, to disrupt the silence before it calcifies into stone. You now know what they tried to erase. You've seen behind the curtain. You've felt the weight. And now, you have a choice. Forget it. Scroll on. Let it become just another strange tale, filed away in a playlist of curiosities. Or you remember, you speak, you protect the names, not just the ones who died, but the parts of yourself that these systems want to strip away. Because in the end, the greatest resistance is memory, and the most dangerous weapon is a man who refuses to forget. If this reached you, if it stirred something in you, then leave this message behind for the next to find. Stone does not feel, but we do. And that is how we take everything back.